Welcome, friends and family, to another episode of Dharma Junkie. I've been reading some articles lately about saying the phrase, I'm too busy, because it's something that I do a lot, and it's something that I'm also trying to break myself out of. And one thing that I noticed is, over and over in these articles, it kind of goes along the lines of saying, instead of saying, I'm too busy, say that my priority is. Because that's really all it is. It's, what are you prioritizing? That's what it breaks down to. So I've got to learn how to either reprioritize my life or at least stop saying I'm too busy, because that's just a cop out. And that's something that I try not to do, is cop out. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm a man of my word. That's pretty much all I've got going for me, is I do what I say I'm going to do, which I didn't do for a long time. So I take a lot of pride in the fact that I do that now. And I guess when people don't do that themselves, it bothers me a lot, because I see like myself in those people. When I see people, they say, I'll show up at this time and then they never show up, or they'll do something and then they don't do it. I see that part of myself from when I was using in those people. And I also see a lot of people in my past that have let me down, which I guess goes back to, me having insecure attachment issues, which I for sure do, because I've been trying to work through that for a while. But it is what it is. So, we do what we can, and I'll meditate on it and think about it and sit with it, because that's all I can really do. I mean, what else would I do? Sit around and weep the tears of 1,000 orphans? I don't think so. And anyway, on this episode, my guest is Padma Menon. Padma is the facilitator of movingarchetypes.com.au, which offers classes that draw on Indian spiritual practice and philosophical traditions to facilitate experiences of connectedness of larger archetypal themes than your own personal experience may provide. And man, I'll tell you honestly, I had no knowledge of Indian dance or anything about it before I talked to Padma, and this is a really eye-opening episode for me, at least, and I hope you enjoy it as well. Without further ado, Padma Menon.
You might catch yourself sliding in and out of hallucinatory state. Just relax and enjoy it. Just relax and enjoy it.
This is an experiment in mind formation. Information. Forming, controlling, operating your mind and your brain. Using digital techniques to overload, scramble, confuse, unfocus your mind. The natural state of the brain is chaos. Chaos is beautiful.
Hi, Justin.
How are you?
I'm well. I realize this is an unearthly hour at your end of the world.
Yes, it's 6 a.m. here.
So I think the calendar invite was, I actually thought I was doing 10 p.m. your time. And I sent you an email saying, is this correct? Because it then said 10 p.m. Australian Eastern time.
Right.
And I didn't get any response, and I thought, oh, well, it must be okay. Maybe you start your day at an unearthly hour.
I do. I wake up very early.
Okay. All right. Okay. So otherwise I just feel terrible that I've woken you up so early.
No. I scheduled everything this way for a reason. I've actually got to be at work at 8 o'clock. So
wow.
I scheduled things before work and after work. So.
Okay. Yes, that's amazing.
It's the only way I can fit everything that I need to get done into my day.
Yeah.
So how are you doing today?
I'm well. Yes, it's 10 p.m. So it's kind of the end of the day here, in my part of the world. And yeah, I've had a busy day, been in the studio. So yeah.
For people that are listening, that's your dance studio. I'm sure you're referring to.
Yes. Are we recording already, Justin?
Yeah, I'm recording.
Okay. All right.
So we can start just however you like.
Well, I think, I was quite intrigued by the conversations that you have on your podcast series,
Hmm.
um, because I think they're difficult things to talk about, but they're really important things. They're difficult things to talk about because because the kind of the big mainstream conversations are quite black and white. I actually sometimes think they're very simple. And the things that we are not so obvious, but are probably far more influential in how we act and how we feel. They're just the things that we we can't grasp materially, and we can't language it, and we can't um, give it form so easily. And so we think that they're not important.
Right.
And yet I think, they are the ones that have the most profound influences on how we act, and what shapes the way we think and live. So yeah, I always commend people that are able to have these conversations and be brave enough to put these conversations out into the world. So congratulations, Justin. Yeah, I really thought, and I think there's a lot more of this kind of conversation I notice in your part of the world. I think we're not quite so prolific in talking about these things in Australia.
Really?
Yeah. So I feel like in Australia there's two extremes. So either we're very material, we're very kind of, in the sense we're kind of economics and science driven, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's, there's a whole spectrum of conversations possible. Or we get very we lose all the rigor, and we become, we sort of become too kind of easygoing, too complacent in the way we deal with complexity.
Right.
We make it into something a bit coy and simplistic, and yeah. So somewhere in between would be great.
That would be nice. That's the goal, right?
Yes.
So, for people that are listening that don't know, you run movingarchetypes.com.au. And
Yes.
do you want to tell people a little bit about what your goal with that is, what you're doing, what your mission is?
Yeah. So I was born in India, and I lived and studied there. I studied the traditional, one of the traditional Indian temple dance theatre styles. So my teacher, they were a lineage of temple priests. He was the 10th or 11th generation in his lineage, and they basically performed these dances very much as part of the rituals in the temples. He was among the very early practitioners to leave this village and the temple and move into the city, which was at the time called Madras. It's called Chennai now. And he opened it up to people that are not strictly in the direct lineage, and also to women, because the style was done by the male priest, the male Brahmin priest. And so he opened it up to women, and I was lucky enough to be one of those early women who was able to study with him. And I did that for quite a long time. Traditionally in Indian dance, you have this very long period of apprenticeship to your teacher. You almost live in his house with his family, and you study, you perform with him. So I really had the privilege and honor of studying in that way.
Right.
And then I left India and moved to Australia to study, and ostensibly also to take a bit of a break from dancing, because I think as a young woman growing up and having a Western style education in India, I was questioning some of the ways in which we unquestioningly accept mythology, and it didn't seem to fit in completely to where I was as a woman. So I'm coming to Australia. It made me think about the dancing in a very different way. And I started off by doing the classical dance, but then I also started studying contemporary Western dance and working with different people. And that really took me, I moved from Australia to Europe. I was working there with a production house called Corso. I was working as a choreographer and doing mostly contemporary work. But my quest always was to find the deity space, to find this deity, these archetypes, the mythologies, really inquiring into what is the purpose. I felt like there was a deep purpose because I saw that in the way my teacher was in his work. And I knew there was like a really deep purpose to this, that there was an inquiry in there somewhere. But my quest was, what does this mean in our times? And how is this still relevant? And how do we do this? How do we practice this in our times? And it took me quite a while, decades of inquiring, of working with different people, working on my own body, my own practice. I was also studying philosophy. It is also about a life lived. I think in these practices, it's not an art form that you do and your life is something else. Right. So you live as you dance. And I think the life takes you there too. So in a way, events in my life, all sort of things came together to where I am now. And what I do with moving archetypes is to reclaim the contemplative practice of dance, of temple dance, and of dance, really, and in a larger way to really offer aesthetics as contemplation. And I think this is really important because aesthetics aligns with our love of pleasure. I think human beings, one of the biggest drives in human beings, as we know, is our drive for pleasure. And in Indian philosophy, it says that this drive for pleasure is stronger than anything else. It's stronger than our intellect. It's stronger than our mind. There is no way of thinking over it and thinking out of it and controlling it. Whatever we do, ultimately we will do because it gives us comfort, it gives us pleasure. And so rather than fighting with it, I think what contemplation and aesthetic philosophy brilliantly does is to say, okay, how do we work with pleasure? How does pleasure itself become an inquiry? How does it become transformative? And I think that's one of the most powerful ways of bringing people into that inquiry and into, not unconsciously accepting things and stories and narratives that we've been given over centuries and habits that we have, and to really be able to act and think, to source our action from a space of authenticity. So I think that's the power of aesthetic. So for me, what I do with moving archetypes is to offer dance as such a practice. How does to reclaim how dance is contemplative. So it's not just as an entertainment. It's not as an escape, but really it's about almost turning completely in the face of reality, and with great sensuousness and beauty, saying, "I'm ready to play with you."
Right. Would you say it's dance is a form of meditation almost?
Yes, it is. Absolutely, because contemplation and meditation are the same things. I suppose I hesitate to use the word meditation because that word has so much weight in it. It's carrying a lot of baggage, and it carries baggage about somehow that it's a withdrawal from pleasure and sensuality, that it's a withdrawal somehow from beauty, that it is something. There's a certain passivity sometimes that people associate with meditation.
Right.
There is sometimes a certain escapism, whereas I think aesthetics is about, it's almost like you work with all your senses at the same time. It's like this hyper sensual way And it's not an indulgence, but it's like getting away from the fear of experiencing beauty and pleasure, and really feeling and understanding the nature of pleasure.
Right. Yeah, I think there's actually a big misconception with meditation itself. I think a lot of people do view it as escapist in a way.
Yeah.
But if you really know anything about meditation, which I'm sure you do, that's almost completely wrong. Whereas it is very, very sense based. Meditation itself is, especially mindfulness meditation or any kind of meditation of that sort, is really noticing all of your senses and noting everything and really taking everything in the same way that you're describing with the dance. So it's not, people view it as a form of almost spiritual bypass meditation. They think it's channeling all your thoughts and completely wiping them out of your head, and that's not the case. It's really more noticing all of your thoughts and sitting with them rather than tuning them out, which I don't think a lot of people really know. Most people don't, unless you're an active practitioner of meditation. I don't think you really know. I would say the average person believes that you just sit there and try to not think, which is not the case.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and that's why I said, meditation is the same as contemplation. It's an inquiry, but generally the kind of, the more, I suppose, the more kind of widely available forms often talk about something that's a bit more relaxing and kind of a bit of a rest or an escapism.
Right.
I mean, I suppose the one thing about an aesthetic approach to contemplation is that it gives form. And that's a powerful thing.
Right.
So it actually it's like almost giving form to the formless. And these practices were really, they come from revelation. And that sense of revelation as the basis of knowing is something really special. And it's there in, as you would know, it's there in every ancient culture. This practice of knowing from revelation. And the amazing thing with those practices, whether it's ritual or dance, you're somehow giving form to this experience of unity, this experience of, where you are not separate from that which you experience, so that you're not watching something or you're not, it's not about something, but you are the experience. And how do you give form to that? And that's the power of these, the aesthetic practices, is that you are able to move in it, to kind of express it. And that is something really special, I think. And that's, and through moving it, you feel that transformation. You feel, it becomes kind of a dynamic thing as well. That sense of moving in that perception and feeling. And I think that's why, for me, the aesthetic practices are really special. Because, I mean, I do feel the power of meditation. I've studied yoga for many years as well. And I think even in the aesthetic philosophy, they say that the power of this is that because it really harnesses our love of beauty and pleasure, there's a gentleness and there's a beauty and there's a lovingness that I think protects us from getting too austere, maybe, and too kind of sometimes a certain coldness can come into practices when we think that it's in some way a withdrawal or a separation from desire or pleasure or experiences like that.
I had a question. You spoke of your lineage and your teacher. Who was your teacher exactly?
My teacher was a very legendary Indian dance guru, as they say, called Venkatechana Satyam. He is no more. He came from a family. His family name is Vempati. Like I said, he was the 10th or 11th generation dancer in his family. And they were about, I think it's about 9 families in this little village who were ordained to perform these dances in the temple. There was a small temple in this village, and these families were ordained to perform these dances as part of the worship in the temple. And this is really powerful, Justin, because you can see how dance had a very different place. It was really, so people would come to the temple to pray, and then this dance was there as well. So for them, there was no difference between the dancing or watching a ritual. It was, and the people that performed it did not perform because they wanted to entertain those who came to watch, but they were doing it because it was part of their ritual offering to the deities in the temple. And so there was this extraordinary, this transmission really that happened, that if you were in the presence of these performers, according to the philosophy of aesthetics, you actually felt the deities. You would feel the very deities that they were invoking, the same power, that when you were watching, you would also experience the same thing. So this whole reason for dancing, the whole reason why people watched it, it was completely different. They didn't do it because they, my teacher, for example, it was never a conscious choice that he thought, I like dancing and I want to be creative, so I will go and learn dance.
Right.
Yeah, it was something that, was in his family. It was his obligation, his duty, being born in that family, to continue that lineage. And he really always had that sense that for him, dance was a sacred duty. And that's how he, when he taught us, he said, you serve the dance. And that's never gone away from me. I feel that, and he always said, the dance is not about the deity, the dance is the deity. And when I was very young, I never quite understood it, but now I just know. I know what that means.
Yeah. It's funny how those things don't hit you until later.
Yes, absolutely.
I've had those moments myself where I just didn't understand what they were trying to tell me, and then months, years down the road, it was, oh, okay. So the deity is the dance. I totally understand what you're saying by that, because, like I said, I've had those very moments myself.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because sometimes people are, it's so hard, as it's so difficult to talk about these things, which is what you try to do in your series,
right?
Talking about things that are untalkable in many ways.
Yeah, things where language fails us.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And I use that term all the time to describe many different experiences, and it's beautiful that you're using dance, which is the complete antithesis of language.
Yes.
In your search for meaning. That's beautiful. I love it. I went to your website after we started talking and read quite a bit about you and just your, everything you're doing. I thought it was fascinating. I couldn't wait to talk to you. I couldn't wait to have you on the show. This is just amazing.
Yeah, no, I'm really delighted to be here, Justin. I have to say, this is the first time I'm doing something like this in the US.
Oh, really?
So I'm really excited.
Oh, it's fantastic. Excellent. I'm glad I can help you out.
Yeah. Well, I have done a couple of small contracts, like working with dance companies in the US a couple of times. That was a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the first time, I've done something like this.
You have, as I said, you have movingarchetypes.com.au,
Mm-hmm.
and you have online courses available. How long have you been offering the online courses? Is it something you've just been doing since the whole pandemic started, or is it something you've been doing for a while? Is it something you plan to continue? And how accessible is that to people across the world?
So Justin, I have to say, it's this, before the pandemic, I would never have thought about online classes. I do online classes, but sometimes usually with people that I've worked before, and maybe we're just touching base and kind of just building on things. But of course the pandemic's changed everything, and I'm not going to be really easy and say good things will come out of everything. And it's absolutely been very, very challenging. I know it's been challenging, particularly in your part of the world, but we've had our challenges here as well. But one of the things I had to do was to go online, and now I have had people interested. So I'm doing kind of an introductory class on Saturday, and I've actually got people from the US, from France, and from different parts of Australia, who were going to join us for that class. So I am thinking, I think the online will continue, and I'm sort of looking at how I make these offerings, hopefully at more reasonable times. So I just have to work out the time differences, and so offer them at times that are going to work for the places that I would like to share this dance with.
Right. Have you thought about doing recording the courses and offering them as video that's available when you're not necessarily present? I do have. I've just put out kind of a test course, one course which I just put online on Podium. And that's just the first thing I've done. So that's like a video course. So there's no interactive element in it. People just download the videos and go through it. That's quite a short, I think the whole duration, maybe just over an hour, but there are a few different short videos for practice, and then people can watch it and then practice on their own, and then refer back to the videos when they need to. So that is something I'm looking at as well. I always think the interactive classes obviously offer something quite special, because I think what I found, we've been doing online now since about March, and when we started, I was quite concerned because there is, of course, a real importance about that embodied presence. Right.
And I had lots of doubts about whether this is going to work. But having done this and having talked to people who've been doing this with me, I think when this online interactive work brings very different things to it. For one, because contemplation is essentially a deeply intimate and personal practice. It's not really about community, and it's not really about a group thing. Contemplation in Indian philosophy is very much something, in its essence, it's solitary. Right. And it's for yourself, it's intimate and it's personal. And I think what people have been telling me is when they are in their own homes and they are doing it, even though, there are a few of us online and some in the studio, I think people feel like it comes home, the practice. They're not in the studio, they are really there with themselves, with this practice. Right. And that focus on what's going on, that really intimate, the undistracted focus on what's going on for them is, I think many of them say that really is quite powerful. So yeah. Sometimes I think, it's taught me you've got to just trust the deities. If they say go online, just go online and do it. And it'll work out.
Yeah, I can see how the online might actually, in a way, be better for that, because as you were saying, you are by yourself in your home or where your office or wherever you happen to be participating in the courses at.
Yeah.
So not only are you able to participate, but there is that sense of just being alone and a sense of self.
Yes.
By being by yourself, which definitely translates more to there's no distraction.
Yes. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I found, Justin, was really interesting that when there are people in the studio, it was different. But for a while we couldn't have anybody in the studio. So everything had to be online. Right. And I just found it was very powerful even for me, because I was completely relying on being totally in touch with what was going on for me and trying to bring that out in the instruction. And I think there was a real intensity to that process because I was also not, there was no one else in the room with me. I was in the studio and I was relying entirely on the feedback from my own movement and what was going on to then, feed that back to people participating online. So I think, there was a lot of different things and quite unexpected things going on. I mean, I'm not saying that it is better than, kind of a process where you are present. But I just think this is different, and this is where the world is at now, and this is what we're asked to do now.
Yeah.
So, I just thought, well, I just got to trust that the deities know better than me. So just keep going.
They generally do.
Yes, they do.
99.9% of the time. Well, we'll say 100%. It's definitely 100%.
Yeah, they do. You just got to go along with it.
Yeah, I noticed you offer some like philosophy type classes on your site as well. And, do you want to expound on that a bit and what your personal philosophy is?
Yeah. So, Justin, I'm quite keen on inviting people because I think, like I said, I think sometimes there is this big divide between, you can dance, and dancing is something that's completely has nothing to do with anything philosophical or intellectual.
Right.
And then there is, the philosophy and the intellect, and that's like, the two shall never meet. But in Indian philosophy, when you talk about contemplation, there are three dimensions to contemplation, and one is the information, and the information can be a practice like dance, but it's also the philosophy behind the practice. Like it's the philosophy that gives you a sense of why do you come to the practice? How do you come to the practice? Because the reason, your intention, the reason why you come to the practice, the state of being that you bring to the practice, the questions that you bring to the inquiry, they are profoundly important for the practice. So that, that whole way of getting to that thinking and getting to that inquiry is what the philosophy is all about.
Oh, for
and
sure.
then you have the and then you have the practice, and it's actually an iterative process because the practice then feeds back into the philosophy and so on and so forth. And so, they always say about the texts, they say the texts are only signposts, and it is the practice that kind of reveals things about the text. And then you go back to the text, and then it means completely different things. And so this process of deepening, the text is as alive, it's not static, just like the practice.
Right.
But only when you do the two together do the both come alive. It's an absolutely, it's not just words when I say it, but I can tell you from my experience that, the things are like both the text and the practice, they keep living and they keep deepening. And, so this movement between the text and practice is vital for me. And so when I offer these philosophy classes, I do say that it's open to people, even those who don't want to do the dance. So that's the, the offering is to encourage those who are doing the dance to also find out more about, why they're dancing, what is this dance about, what questions, what the inquiry is about. So for example, this next course, I'm looking at the woman's life as a contemplative pathway, as an archetype of a contemplative pathway. And I think that came to me because we're doing this term, the focus of all the courses is on Prakriti, which is the principle of nature. And by nature, we mean, it's the body, the senses, the mind, everything material, our emotions. So this dimension that we are in, which sometimes is called Maya as well. So this dimension, so all of that is nature. And usually we think nature is feminine, but it's not really in a way that we think of as masculine and feminine. It's got more to do with certain kinds of experiences that are probably more common in a woman's life. And it's not that just because you're a woman that, it gives you a special understanding.
Right.
It is just that when you're present to those experiences, perhaps, it's more available to you as a woman in your life. But in terms of being present, I don't think there's much difference between men and women, that we have to work on being present. And so I just wanted to talk about some of these events, some of these events that kind of are contemplation milestones, right, and how a woman's life is an archetype of that, and use some of the stories of mystics, women mystics. And the other thing, Justin, that I felt like I wanted to do it is because sometimes we think of, spirituality, philosophy as men talking to us. And, I just thought it's important to feel like there is a role for women as well, that there is a role, there's a wisdom and a role for women, and a kind of, giving more visibility to that, the woman as the mystic, the woman as the teacher, giving more visibility to that was felt important as well.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I would definitely say that as far as philosophy, at least in the Western world, it's definitely more male leaning. So it's an interesting take on what you're doing, and I appreciate it very much. There is so much feminine energy in the world. Just the rebirth, the constant cycle of rebirth that's going on, and I'm sure you could expound on that a little more, and your particular ideas. You said you were speaking about different. I can't remember exactly the way you phrased it. Different women through history. I can't believe what I can't remember what you said exactly. Do you want to touch on that again?
Yes. So I think when we was preparing for this term's courses, and I was struggling a little bit with the popular kind of concept of nature is female, the consciousness space, or right, what we in Indian philosophy we call Brahman, is male, and then there's this union that happens, but the reality is it's not so simple. It's not in the gendered way that we understand that. It's not the woman that we think of now, but it is, when they talk about the woman or the feminine, it is about certain experiences, certain states of being. For example, like that kind of the desire, the sensuousness, the yearning for union, the kind of the movement of sensuousness, right, movement of surrender, those kind of things which are, I suppose they're considered to be feminine qualities, but it's not that they are, somehow the, exclusive to women. And in my tradition, in the tradition that I studied, men, it was only male dancers, and the most important roles were female roles. So these men, they danced as women. Right. And when they danced as women, and when I've seen these performances, you were transported, because what you saw was this movement that was beyond gender. And I don't even mean gender neutral or anything. There was something there. There was a magic there. Right. That was like beyond this gender, the sensuousness and everything just kind of, became something else. And this is it, so 1 + 1 in contemplation is never 2, but it's something else, always something else. So, when you start moving the form, there is no linear kind of trajectory from, if I'm putting this and this into the form and I know where I'm going to get, you never know where you're going to get, and that's the magic of it. And
Right.
that's what you saw with these people. And so I know from experience that there's certain things that are, I suppose, part of contemplation. For example, things like being taken, and for a woman, in a woman's life, those experiences of childbirth, where your body is taken, it's taken by this life that's within you, and it's taken when you give birth, in a way that, when you're present to it as a woman, it's sometimes terrifying. It's like something is happening to your body, and your body's just being taken, and then something emerges from your body. And so there are these things that I suppose for a woman happen as events of being taken. Again, when you have a woman's menstruation is another time where there's a process that takes your body and things happen. There are also other things that some of the women mystics in their lives, for a woman, when she sets up on a contemplative path, there's usually in many of the stories, she's thrown out of the families, she's rejected, she doesn't get any social approval. So, and there is a big thing in contemplation practice that you have to be really brave, because you cannot seek affirmation. You cannot look for society's approval. You cannot look to be celebrated for what you're doing, because the minute you look for all that, you are not really changing any paradigms, because ultimately contemplation is about radically transforming paradigms. And when you do that, no one is going to be clapping their hands, because people are terrified of changing paradigms.
That's true.
Yes. So in many of the women mystics' life, that was really clear, that the minute they set out on this path, people tried to poison them, people tried to kill them. There was so much danger in what they were, doing. But I think you see that more clearly when a woman does it. Whereas, even though it can happen in a man's life, I think the more you can see it more radically and more clearly in a woman's life. So I thought it's important for us, particularly because the male voice is so present in kind of spiritual traditions and practices all over the world, because even in India, it's the male teachers, and when the women are there, it's almost like the women can't really talk seriously about things, somehow. Right. The women, we know what I mean. They can't talk philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. They're just not taken seriously.
Yeah. And so I thought it's,
or a lot of times not even given the opportunity to talk, whether it be taken seriously or not.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so I thought it's really, it's like the women can do the soft things, like, they can be in the therapy things and they can be in those kind of things. But when it comes to contemplation and philosophy, I just feel like, the female voice, and yet I feel like the female experience is so profoundly aligned with this, with the some of these milestones of contemplation, and so some, really kind of bringing that to the fore, and so like how a woman's life can be considered as an archetype of some of those contemplation milestones. Right. And we, women need to be present to that too. And like I said, it's not automatic that because you're born a woman, it's sort of automatically there. I think, like I said, I think it's about presence. It's about presence to those experiences and being really present to them.
Right. Yeah, because I believe that feminine and masculine exist outside of gender-specific male and female. The feminine energy exists within men, and the masculine energy exists within women. It's just it's the balance. There's men definitely tend to have a little more masculine energy, and women tend to have a more feminine energy. But I think they're both existent within us.
Yes, Absolutely, absolutely. And it can be the other way too. I mean, when we talk about things like patriarchy, I have seen, women who are, very patriarchal, and I've seen men who are not. So,
Exactly.
it's exactly that. These are just certain responses that we have. But I think it's important to have the woman's voice
Yeah,
in
I
in
agree.
in in contemplation. Yeah.
Yeah, Padma, you just said one thing that really caught me as interesting. You said that women, you've seen women in patriarchal positions
Yes.
and act in that way, and you've
Yes.
seen men that haven't. And I think that's important to touch on, because there's this big misconception that men are behind this evil patriarchy, and and,
Yeah.
and it's not that simple. It's just not that simple.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And I mean, I think patriarchy again for me is a way of uh, it's a narrative. Ultimately, it's a narrative. It's a
Is
narrative that assigns power in particular ways.
right.
Um, and I think because of that, we have certain narratives that come out of it that, for example, value materialism, value kind of measurements, and that kind of thing, which is valuing profit. I think all of that is deeply interlinked with the patriarchal narrative.
Right.
Now, I think we all participate in it.
I
And I don't think it's doing anybody any good. I don't think it's doing the men any good. I mean, I have a son, and I look at him, and I think he struggles with this, with this kind of the narratives of masculinity that is available under patriarchy. And I
right.
think women struggle. I have a daughter as well. So I don't think anyone's coming out winners in this. And that's where I think a paradigm shift. I don't think it's useful anymore, because we've been trying for generations to kind of go against it and go move here and there and everywhere. And that's where I think a contemplative inquiry is so important, even though it seems like it's like this left field thing, but it's the only thing that can overthrow paradigms. We can't stay in the same paradigm and try and find something that opposes it, something that moves to the left of it, to the right of it. We just have to throw the whole thing out.
Right.
And I think that's where these, and then what do we do? But we can't go there if we are not, we need to source our action from a mind that is really congruent. So long as our mind is in chaos and disordered, nothing that we're going to come up with is going to be incongruent, sort of it's not going to be congruent with reality, with nature. So the only thing we can do is to really go to that feeling, that experience of congruence. And this is not airy-fairy. This is a possibility. This is possible.
Right.
And people have, people live in this. People act from this. And then when you do that, your action is different. Your everything is different. You think differently. You perceive differently. You act differently. And then your action is able to hold this complexity.
Yeah.
And not have to split it up into, man, woman, economics and spirituality and
Right.
these kind of opposing narratives.
Right. Yeah. Because they're all one. They're all one, and
Yes.
I think it might be a while before we start to see a massive recognition of that. But I do see a shift happening in the world. Have you noticed that? It does seem to be a pretty big consciousness shift going on in the world right now.
Yeah, I feel that people are beginning to question. They're less afraid. I suppose, what the pandemic has done is things that we thought unimaginable have happened.
Right.
And I think people's sense of comfort and a sense that they know everything, perhaps is shaken a bit.
Right.
Which I think is a good thing. I mean, I'm not saying this in a glib way.
No.
We've all suffered.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of us have suffered far more than others have.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that thinking that we know everything and that we have ultimate agency is not a real thing. It's just not the reality. And I suppose my prayer and my deepest desire is that people can move into a state of being that can feel, can feel that what it is to be at one, in harmony with everything, what it is to act for the good of everything and not just for the good of one race or, one of us, or, what does, it's not just words, but what
Right.
does action feel like when we can do that?
Right. Well, people are just so tribal. That's the big, that's the big hang up. I think is there's just so much division in the world, and it's manufactured division. It's not even real division. People group themselves in the race, or they group themselves in the nationalities or religions, and it blinds us all to the fact that we are all one.
Yes. And that to me, Justin, is, when I think about, like I said, because I've been, doing a lot of study and reading, and, part of my dance is that experience too, is the sense that when a lot of ancient cultures, when you go back in time, they have very similar, they have very similar philosophies and deities and ways of understanding and perceiving the world. And that's not an accident. It's just because, consciousness is not, there is no color or nationality or religion or anything for that. It is,
Right.
Exactly. It's what it is. And everybody, in the core of their beings, we all have that. And many of the ancient practices knew that space. They knew, and they could give language to it, and they could give expression to it. And when we talk about deities, those deities are the ways in which we, again, give language to that which cannot be languaged. And if you look at deities across the cultures, they're not just mythologies, and that's the sad thing. We've made all the deities into stories and mythologies, and then they've lost their potency. But what they offer is a way of being, a way of moving, that you can feel this power. You can feel the power of everything moving with you. Everything in nature, the trees, the birds, and everything that moving with you, and that's such a powerful feeling. And then that everything you do, everything you think, everything you feel is linked. And there is no action, there is no possibility of being able to, live in a way or act in a way that is disconnected. It's going to be destructive. You
Right.
know that. Yeah.
Yeah, because every little thing you do sends ripples out across the world and affects everything else.
Absolutely. And when you really are moving in these practices, when you open yourself up, and when you can get beyond the, that's why I don't, even though I come from an Indian culture, and I source my practice from that, and there is an integrity for me in doing that. But that's not to make it dogmatic. That's not to kind of add another kind of separation.
Right.
But it is to say that this is available to everybody, these practices. And like I said, many ancient cultures had similar practices. But I think what it asks of us is to be attentive, and to be attentive to things that are hiding in plain sight. That's what it is. It's hiding in plain sight. It just needs our attention.
Yeah, I can't agree with that more.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So where can people find you online other than your movingarchetypes.com site? You do a podcast as well, don't you?
Yes, I do. So there is an internet radio here in Canberra, which is where I live in Australia. It's the capital of Australia, and it's called Living Arts Canberra. And so I do a fortnightly podcast called Conscious Conversations. So, and there I'm just again using it as an opportunity to reflect on different aspects in contemplation. And again, I source it from my own practice. You know, and I just want to say a bit about that, because one of the things that concerns me, Justin, is, for a long time, we've actually been cherry picking from practices and traditions. And, but what we've done then is to construct certain, certain products which really don't challenge us, which kind of go to our kind of habitual tendencies of escaping, of entertaining, or variety. And so for me, that immersion in a particular practice with integrity is important, not because it's needing to be religious or dogmatic or any of that, which I'm not, but it is because the worldview of a practice really is very nuanced, and that's what creates that change and shift. And so when I say, that's what I talk about and that's what I contemplate on, it's because you really see a lot of the subtlety, and you really see the rigor and the subtlety. And I don't want to use the word discipline because it's such a brutal word.
Right,
but
it's very stiff.
Yeah, but it's about, just knowing that there is a rigor to this. It's not a casual engagement. Yeah.
Yeah, I was guilty of that for a long time. I took little bits of different philosophies and practices and kind of had a mishmash of things that I was doing. And it wasn't until I started doing one dedicated practice and kind of stopped with everything else and just really started following one practice that things really started to come into line for me.
Yeah.
So I get exactly what you're saying, Padma.
Yeah. And I think, Justin, it's just because, in Indian practice, my philosophy teacher in India always used to say, look, the mind is a very powerful thing. And the thing with the mind is it does not like radical transformation. It absolutely does not. And it's very good at leading us into pretenses of change, so we do something and we think, we're having a change. But the thing is that kind of profoundly, that paradigmatic transformation is something, it's really something. And I don't even know if I can find words for it, but it is it's a transformation in a way that you can't even think. And that doesn't mean that it's violent or negative or bad, but it's totally unimaginable. So as long as you're not really moving in it, you can't really imagine it in any way. And that's, when you immerse yourself in a practice, that's what you experience and you move. But I also feel sad, and this is again something my teacher always said, is that offering something less than that to someone who is really ready for radical transformation is if there's any wrong things to be doing, that's probably one of them. You don't want to do that as a teacher.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It seems ill-advised.
Yes. And it's a precious thing. These practices are precious things. They really are precious things. And a person who comes to the door, and in Sanskrit there is a word called sahridaya, and that means of the same heart as the teacher. And that's a beautifully precious thing. When someone says, I'm ready to move with you, then that is a really sacred thing and has to be honored.
Right. Yeah, just I guess the turning over of the self to the practice, Yeah, I see that.
Yeah,
That,
absolutely.
yeah, that's a huge step.
It is a huge step. It's an absolutely huge step. And that's why, the kind of life you live is an important aspect of this practice. If you're doing it as a practice. So, when I offer my classes, I offer them at different levels. So there is a class which is, looks more like a dance class.
Mm.
My classes always have philosophical aspects of it, but that one is more like a class for someone who is interested in the philosophy, interested in the dance, but may not want to kind of move more into the contemplative practice. So I honor that.
Right.
But then I have a dance contemplation class, which is for those who are prepared to move more into the practice itself. And then I have like a deep dive class, which is really, it's a class where you cannot hide. I can't hide either. So that's a class where, it goes much more deeper into the practice, and there's much less noise and much, as in, no ornamentation. Not that it is there in other classes, but it gets much more simpler and much more focused and more of a deep dive. So I recognize that as well in the classes.
Right. How do you go about making it as you said, a deeper dive? What's included? What do you do differently within those classes from the other classes that make them more intensive, so to speak?
So what the deeper dive classes, I base them on, in dance, there's 108 constellations, which is given in this ancient text. So this dance text dates back to about between the 3rd and 5th century BCE. So it's a very old text, and there's 108 constellations, dance constellations, and they were supposed to be revealed by Shiva, who's the deity of dance. So it's a revelation. It's a knowing coming out of revelation. And they're very mysterious constellations. So there's no story attached to it. There is no explanation. But when you move them, when you talk about this transformation, when you talk about, it's like it moves the architecture of your feeling and perception as you move in this movement constellations. And each of them has does that in a specific way, and they are different. Each time you come to them, you encounter them differently. I mean, there is a continuity, but there's a difference as well. And what it really does, when you talk about you change, it's this, it's like this inner change. It's actually changing the very architecture of your emotion, your feeling, your perception, your senses in the body. I'm trying to find words for it, but that's the way that I can express it.
Okay.
And what it reveals to you is that the change you need to make is very deep. It's like it's the cellular level change.
Right.
And you can't do that by talking about it. You can't talk your way into it. You can't think your way. There is this something needs to move profoundly deep within you. And when you move in these constellations, you can really feel these, completely astounding shifts that happen. I don't know, am I making sense?
No, it makes absolute sense to me.
Yeah.
That makes total sense. I had a question. The lineage of the style of dance that you do and the constellations, the 108 constellations, how far back does that date?
So the Natya Shastra itself, I'm going to get you the exact date. So just let me have a quick look, because I always forget. The Natya Shastra, which is the text on this kind of temple dance, this contemplative temple dance, is dates to between 200 BCE and 200 CE. Yeah, and so the text didn't invent the dance. The text was really just bringing into a kind of record what was already going on. So
Okay.
the dancing itself is much older than that. The dancing is there in the Vedas, which is an even older.
Right. I'm familiar with Vedas.
You know the Vedas, yeah. So that's like 1500 to 1200 BCE.
Right.
So you there is dance in the Vedas, and the way that the dance is used in the Vedas is very much as an expression of revelation. And so these dancers in the Vedas, they were called kavis in Sanskrit, which today, people say it means a poet, but in the Vedas, a kavi is a dancer, priest, poet, all in the one, like these ancient shamans, really. And they gave form to revelation. And so they had this really special place. So in fact, the Vedas say there are the sages who also kind of know revelation. And then there are these dancers who are more special because they give form to what cannot have form. And in giving form, they actually allow other people to experience this. When they give form to it, people standing around them experience this, this presence of the deities. And that's why they were so powerful and so special, because they are able to do this. And so it was always, the dance was something like that. And, my teacher, it's not done like this in India anymore. It really isn't.
Really?
No, it's not. No, dance has become very much, in the theaters, it's become,
Right.
very much like a product. It's really not done like this at all, which is very sad.
Right.
And while people
Would you say
talk about
would you say it's more of it's become more of just a form of entertainment and recreation rather than a spiritual experience?
I think so, Justin. I'm sure people will be upset if I say that, but people still talk about it being spiritual. But the question was always, and this is one of the reasons for my big seeking and inquiry. I was told it's spiritual, I was told it's religious, but I couldn't figure out how.
Right.
I thought, how is this religious?
Yeah.
And it's not religious simply by saying it's religious or simply because you have a story about a god. It wasn't about the god. It was the deity.
Right. It was the God.
Yeah, it was the god. Dance was the deity. Dance was the god or the goddess. It wasn't about. And one can't, as a dancer, bring that. You can't kind of invoke that if you aren't living a life like that.
Right.
If your whole life isn't just flowing towards that, it's not just possible to get up on the stage and summon the deity.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
And then, please the critics and the audiences and everything at the same time.
Yeah. I don't think you can do all those at the same time. And in fact,
No.
it seems kind of counterintuitive.
No. So when I recently, now I haven't been performing since the pandemic, but in our studio when we had performances, and also some of the work I did in India before coming to Australia, I used to try and recreate these performances, as I understood they were done, which is to have people in the studio very intimate, to prepare them. So when they came, kind of prepare them. And I would tell them, we didn't want people clapping or anything because, it was like we were not pleasing them, as performers. We were not there to please them, but we were there to kind of be the deities.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
I get that. Yeah. Don't clap. We're not here for that. We're not here for your entertainment.
No, we're not here to. Yeah. And I used to say that to them. I said, please don't clap because we're not here to please you. Don't expect to be entertained.
I'm sure it's still entertaining, but that's not the purpose.
No.
It's just a lovely side effect.
Yes, because there's beauty, that's why aesthetics was so powerful, because there is beauty. Aesthetics is always the dynamics of beauty.
Right.
And that's why aesthetic contemplation was powerful, because you were contemplating, you were inquiring in beauty. And, without beauty, how can you be compassionate and loving and giving? And, it's not possible if you're not in beauty.
Right. Yeah. I think all those things are synonymous.
Yeah.
Giving and compassion and beauty. I think they're
absolutely
all the same.
And the dynamics of that is aesthetics. Aesthetics is just simply the dynamics of beauty.
Right. That's fascinating. That's so interesting. I've never really thought about it like that. That's awesome. That's so cool. I've just never thought about it in that light. It's super interesting. I'm going to be thinking about that all day now. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you sitting down and talking to me about this. I think it's super fascinating, and I hope you continue doing it and spreading your dance and teaching others and bringing them closer to the deities.
Thank you so much, Justin. And, it's really been an honor to be with you. And thank you so very much. And I'm so honored that you woke up so early in the morning to accommodate this time. So I'm really grateful for that.
All right, well, I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, Padma. Thanks to Padma for being on the show, and you can find her at movingarchetypes.com.au. And you know what? Thank all of you. I really appreciate everyone that's took the time to rate and review the show. I really appreciate everyone that's listening. You guys are awesome. I've gotten some really kind emails from some of you. And Heinrich, I'm super happy that nasty bursitis flare-up you've been having has finally subsided. I told you, by the sheer power of thought alone, you could cure yourself. But I promise you, I'm not the Messiah. But I'm pretty sure I have seen him walking across the old bridge here. Quite a bit. He was out there a lot. I never stopped to talk to him. I figured it was just somebody dressed up like Jesus, but it could have been him. And I feel kind of remiss now that I didn't take the time to actually talk to him, because that could have been my one opportunity. Oh well. Thanks again for listening. Namaste.
Chaos is beautiful.